The autumn of 1929 in Harmony Creek, Ohio, was a season of quiet ritual. The maple trees that lined Main Street surrendered their leaves in a final, brilliant blaze of crimson and gold, and the air grew crisp with the promise of an early winter. For Clara Mae Lowell, now a widow of 52, this time of year always brought with it a gentle, pervasive melancholy. It was the season she had met Michael Sterling, and it was the season she had lost him. Clara's life was a portrait of quiet, respectable widowhood. Her husband, a good and steady man named George, had passed away 3 years prior, leaving her with their small, comfortable home and a life of peaceful, if somewhat lonely, routine. She tended her garden, volunteered at the church bake sales, and was a beloved member of the local book club. She had accepted her lot with grace. The fiery, passionate dreams of her youth had long since cooled into the warm, gentle embers of memory. But one memory always burned a little brighter than the others: Michael. He had been the sun around which her 17-year-old world had revolved. The handsome, intelligent son of the town's wealthiest family, he had been charming, kind, and destined for great things. They had shared a whirlwind summer of stolen kisses by the creek and whispered promises under starry skies. Everyone in town had assumed they would marry. Then, it had all ended. A bitter argument between their fathers, a feud over a failed business venture, had torn their families apart. Michael's family had sent him away to a prestigious university back east, and he had never returned. There were no letters, no goodbyes. He had simply vanished from her life, leaving a wound in her young heart that had never truly healed. She had eventually married George, a kind man she respected and cared for. But that first brilliant spark of love for Michael had remained, a secret, dormant ember in her soul. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Clara was leaving the general store, her basket filled with apples for a pie, when a gleaming, expensive automobile, a brand new Packard, the likes of which were rarely seen in Harmony Creek, pulled to a stop in front of the old, deserted Sterling mansion. The Sterling house, once the grandest in town, had sat empty for years, a silent monument to a family that had moved on. A man stepped out of the car. He was tall and distinguished, dressed in a fine city suit, his dark hair now streaked with a handsome silver at the temples. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to the world, but as he looked up at the old, familiar facade of his childhood home, a look of profound, weary sadness crossed his features. Clara froze, her hand flying to her chest, the bag of apples slipping from her grasp and scattering across the dusty sidewalk. Her heart, a quiet and steady thing for so many years, suddenly hammered against her ribs with the frantic, forgotten rhythm of her youth. 34 years had passed. The boy she had loved was gone, but the man who stood before her was unmistakably him. Michael Sterling. He turned at the sound of the apples rolling across the pavement, and his eyes met hers. The street, with its familiar sights and sounds, seemed to fade away. For a moment they were 17 again, standing by the creek, the world full of impossible promise. He saw a woman who was no longer the bright, laughing girl he remembered, but whose kind hazel eyes and gentle face were still achingly familiar. Her hair was more silver than brown, and the lines around her eyes spoke of a life lived, of sorrows weathered and joys known. He took a hesitant step towards her. "Clara Mae?" he asked, his voice a low, rusty murmur, the name a ghost on his lips. "Michael," she breathed, the single word encompassing a lifetime of unspoken questions and what-ifs. The first love she had thought long buried had just walked back into her life. And as they stood staring at each other across a gulf of 34 years on the quiet, sun-dappled expanse of Main Street, neither of them had any idea that their story, the one they thought had ended so long ago, was finally, truly about to begin. The world rushed back in with a dizzying force, the gentle breeze, the distant sound of a car horn, the scent of autumn leaves. The scattered apples lay forgotten at Clara's feet. For a long, heart-stopping moment, they simply stood there on the quiet sidewalk, two ghosts from a forgotten story, suddenly made real. It was Michael who broke the silence, his voice still holding a note of disbelief. I heard you had married George Lowell," he said, his tone gentle. "He was a good man. I was sorry to hear of his passing." "And I was sorry to hear about your parents," Clara replied, finding her voice. "Your father was a pillar of this town for so long." An awkward silence fell between them, thick with all the years and all the words that had never been spoken. The foolish pride of two powerful men, their fathers, had cost them a lifetime. "I've come back to settle the estate," Michael explained, gesturing towards the grand, silent mansion at the end of the street. "A final duty. I plan to sell the house, the business, everything. There's nothing for me here anymore." Clara's heart felt a strange pang at his words. To think of the Sterling mansion, the center of her youthful universe, being sold to strangers, it felt like tearing out the last page of a beloved book. "It is a great deal to handle on your own," she said, her practical nature taking over. A weary, sad smile touched Michael's lips. "You have no idea," he confessed. "The house is full. A lifetime of memories that are not my own. Every room is a museum of a life I was meant to have." He looked at her, his eyes holding a new, hesitant plea. "I confess, Clara Mae, I am overwhelmed. I walk through those rooms and I am a ghost myself." He paused, a man unaccustomed to asking for help, struggling to find the words. "I don't suppose... I know it is an imposition of the highest order, but would you help me? Not with the heavy lifting, of course, but with the memories, to have a friend, someone who knew this house when it was full of life, to help me sort through it all. It would be a kindness I could not repay." The offer was as unexpected as his return. He was asking her to step back into the very house that symbolized her greatest heartbreak, to walk through the rooms where she had once imagined she would be mistress, to sift through the remnants of the life that had been stolen from them. Every instinct for self-preservation told her to refuse, to protect the quiet peace she had so carefully built over the years. But then she looked at his face, at the profound loneliness in his eyes, a loneliness she recognized as intimately as her own. She saw not the powerful industrialist from the city, but the boy she had once loved, now a man adrift in a sea of grief, and her compassionate heart could not refuse him. "Of course, Michael," she heard herself say, the words feeling both strange and perfectly natural. "I would be happy to help an old friend." A look of immense, profound relief washed over his face. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not hide. "You have no idea what that means to me." He bent down and helped her gather the scattered apples, their hands brushing in a fleeting, electric touch that sent a jolt of long-forgotten memory through them both. They walked together side by side down the familiar street towards the imposing gates of the Sterling mansion. The house, once so full of life and laughter in her memories, was now silent and melancholic. A fine layer of dust covered the grand furniture, and the air was still and heavy with the scent of time and disuse. It was a place where joy had gone to sleep. "I don't know where to even begin," Michael said, standing in the cavernous, echoing foyer. "You begin," Clara said softly, her voice a gentle, reassuring presence in the gloom. "With one room at a time." She took off her hat and placed her basket of apples on the grand mahogany table, a small, simple act of domesticity that felt like a quiet reclamation. She was no longer the heartbroken girl locked out of this house. She was a woman, invited back in to help its master find his way. As they stood together in the silent waiting house, surrounded by the ghosts of what might have been, a new, tentative chapter began. It was not a story of passionate, youthful dreams, but of a quiet, mature partnership, a shared task of sorting through the past to see if, perhaps, there was still time to build a future. The Sterling mansion was a time capsule. For the next week, Clara and Michael worked side by side, moving through the silent, dust-sheeted rooms like gentle archaeologists excavating a lost city. They began in the grand parlor, a room that had once been the site of lively parties, now a ghost of its former self. Their task was simple: to sort a lifetime of belongings into 3 categories: keep, sell, or donate. But the task was anything but simple. Every object they touched was laden with memory, a silent witness to a shared history. "Do you remember this?" Michael asked on the second day, pulling a small silver music box from a dusty cabinet. He wound the key, and a tinkling, familiar melody filled the quiet room. It was the song that had been playing the night they first danced at the Founders' Day picnic. Clara's heart gave a painful lurch. "I remember," she whispered. "You were a terrible dancer." A slow, rusty smile touched Michael's lips. "And you told me so. I believe your exact words were, 'You have the grace of a newborn foal, Michael Sterling.'" "I was not wrong," she said, a genuine soft laugh escaping her. It was the first time she had truly laughed in his presence since his return, and the sound was a startling, beautiful thing in the silent house. With each object, another memory was unearthed. Another layer of the 34 years of silence was peeled away. They found old photographs of town picnics, faded dance cards, a pressed flower tucked inside a book of poetry. They spoke of the people they had been, the town they had known, the dreams they had held. They also spoke of the lives they had lived apart. Clara told him about her quiet, steady marriage to George, a man whose gentle kindness had been a balm to her young, broken heart. She spoke of her work at the library, of the comfort she found in the quiet world of stories. Michael, in turn, spoke of his life in New York. He spoke of a marriage arranged by his father, an alliance with another powerful family. His wife, he admitted, had been a beautiful and socially brilliant woman, but their union had been one of cool, polite distance, a business partnership rather than a romance. He spoke of building his father's steel company into an empire, his voice holding the weary tone of a man who had won a race he had never wanted to enter. "I did everything my father asked of me," he said quietly, as they sorted through old papers in his father's study. "I went away. I married the right woman. I made the family name more powerful than he ever dreamed, and none of it ever made me happy." The most painful discovery came in the attic. Tucked away in an old leather-bound trunk, they found a small, ribbon-tied packet of letters. They were addressed to him in her familiar, youthful script. They were the letters she had written to him in that first, heartbroken year after he had left. Letters full of longing and confusion. Letters he had never received. "My father," Michael began, his voice hoarse as he realized the truth. "He never gave them to me. He told me you had forgotten me, that you were already seeing George Lowell. And my father told me you had found a new sweetheart in the city," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He said you had no interest in a simple country girl anymore." They sat in the dusty, sun-drenched attic, the truth of their separation finally laid bare. They had not been torn apart by a change of heart, but by the cruel, calculated pride of two old men. They were not two people who had simply drifted apart. They were the victims of a quiet, heartbreaking betrayal. The discovery changed everything. The last vestiges of awkwardness between them vanished, replaced by a profound, shared sense of a stolen past. The house was no longer just his burden to bear. It was their shared history to reclaim. That evening, they did not return to their separate homes. They were both too emotionally exhausted. They sat in the dusty parlor, a space they had spent the day clearing, and shared a simple meal of bread and cheese from the general store, a bottle of wine Michael had found in the cellar, their only luxury. The room was lit by a single lantern, its warm glow pushing back against the encroaching shadows. The house was still silent, but it was no longer a lonely silence. It was a comfortable, peaceful quiet, the silence of two people who had finally, after a lifetime apart, found their way back to a language only they understood. "We were children, Michael," Clara said, breaking the quiet. "We didn't stand a chance against them." "No," he agreed, his eyes meeting hers in the soft light. "We did not. But we are not children anymore, Clara Mae." He reached across the small space between them and took her hand. His touch was warm, familiar, right. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they were no longer menacing. They were simply sad, quiet witnesses to a new story, a story that was just beginning to be written. In the heart of the House of Memories, two old friends were starting to feel the first, tentative flicker of a love they had both thought long dead. The discovery of the lost letters was a turning point. The shared sense of betrayal, of a future stolen not by fate but by the pride of their fathers, forged a new and powerful bond between them. The ghosts in the Sterling mansion no longer felt like individual sorrows to be borne alone. They were now a shared history, a quiet testament to the love that had been denied them. In the weeks that followed, their work in the house took on a different character. It was no longer a somber task of sorting through a dead man's belongings, but a gentle, collaborative act of reclaiming their own past. They moved through the rooms, and with every object they touched, they pieced together the life they might have had. "This was my father's favorite chair," Michael would say, running a hand over the worn leather of a wingback in the study. "He would sit here for hours, reading his financial papers. I always imagined you sitting in the chair opposite, reading your novels, challenging his stubborn opinions." "He would not have enjoyed being challenged," Clara would reply with a soft smile. "No," Michael would agree, his own smile full of a sad, knowing warmth, "but he would have respected you for it, and he would have come to love you as I did." The past tense of his words, "as I did," hung in the air between them, a constant, unspoken acknowledgement of the love that had once been. But the present tense was beginning to make itself known in small, undeniable ways. It was in the way he would bring her a cup of tea, just as she was beginning to feel a chill. It was in the way she would set aside the local newspaper for him, already knowing which articles would capture his interest. It was in the easy, comfortable silence that could now fall between them, a silence no longer filled with the weight of unspoken words, but with the quiet comfort of a shared presence. They developed a routine. Mornings were for work, for sifting through memories in the dusty, sun-drenched rooms. But as the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, they would stop. They would walk together in the sprawling gardens, the crisp autumn air invigorating them. It was during one of these walks that Michael spoke of his wife. "Her name was Adeline," he said quietly, as they stood by a bed of withered rose bushes. "She was a good woman, kind, elegant, a perfect hostess. It was a good marriage, a successful partnership, but it was not. It was not what we had, Clara Mae. There was no poetry in it." Clara listened, her heart aching for the quiet loneliness he must have felt, even in his own marriage. She understood. Her own marriage to George had been built on a foundation of comfort and respect, but it had lacked the brilliant, heart-stopping spark she had known with Michael. "George was the kindest man I have ever known," she said softly. "He gave me a safe harbor after a terrible storm. I loved him for that. But my heart, it learned to be quiet. With you, all those years ago, my heart knew how to sing." He turned to her, his eyes full of a profound, searching emotion. "And now," he asked, his voice a low murmur, "can it remember the song?" The question was a dangerous, beautiful thing. It was an invitation, a plea. She did not answer with words. She simply met his gaze, and in the quiet of the autumn garden he saw his answer. The physical distance between them began to shrink. A hand brushing against another as they reached for the same book, a shoulder leaning against another as they looked at an old photograph. These small, fleeting touches were like sparks in the dry kindling of their long-suppressed feelings. The true thaw came on a cold, rainy evening. They had finished their work for the day and were sharing a simple supper in the grand, echoing kitchen. A storm had rolled in, the wind howling outside, rattling the old window panes. "It seems we are trapped," Michael said, a small smile on his face. "There are worse places to be trapped," Clara replied, her own smile answering his. After dinner, he built a roaring fire in the parlor fireplace, the first fire that had been lit in that room in years. The flames pushed back against the gloom, filling the room with a warm, dancing light. He found an old, unopened bottle of fine French wine in the cellar, a relic from a long-forgotten celebration. They sat in the two large armchairs before the fire, sipping the wine, the storm raging outside a distant, irrelevant noise. The wine, the fire, the intimacy of the moment, it all conspired to lower their carefully maintained guards. "I often wondered what your life was like," Michael confessed, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "In the city, I would read about you in the papers, the new buildings, the mergers. You seemed like a king in a distant land." "A lonely king," he replied, his gaze fixed on the flames. "In a kingdom of glass and steel. I would look out from my office window at night, at the million lights of the city, and I would feel nothing. I would think of this town, of this house. I would think of you." He turned to her, his eyes full of a raw, unguarded vulnerability. "Did you ever think of me, Clara Mae?" "Every day," she whispered, the truth a simple, unadorned fact. "For 34 years. He set his wine glass down on the hearth. He reached out and took her glass, placing it beside his. He then took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. He gently pulled her from her chair, bringing her to stand before him in the warm glow of the fire. He did not kiss her. He simply held her hands, his thumbs stroking the backs of her knuckles. "All those years," he said, his voice thick with a lifetime of regret. "All those years we lost. For nothing. For the foolish pride of two old men. We cannot get those years back, Michael," she said, her own voice trembling. "No," he agreed, his gaze intense. "We cannot. But we have this moment. We have now." He lifted a hand and gently, reverently, tucked a stray strand of silver-streaked hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered for a moment against her cheek, his touch as soft as a whisper. The air between them crackled, the years of separation melting away in the heat of the fire. The boy and the girl from the past were gone. In their place stood a man and a woman, their hearts full of the quiet, powerful love that had survived it all. And in the heart of the storm, in the heart of their old shared home, a new story was finally, truly, ready to begin. The work of emptying the house slowed as autumn deepened, replaced by the more intimate work of two people rediscovering each other. The Sterling mansion, once a tomb of memories, now felt like a private world where the past and present could finally make their peace. Clara and Michael found an easy rhythm, their days filled with shared tasks and their evenings with quiet conversation by the fire. The love they had lost as youths was being carefully, tentatively rebuilt with the stronger, more durable materials of maturity, respect, companionship, and a deep shared understanding of sorrow. This fragile new world was shattered by a message from the one outside. It came not by letter, but through the crackle of the radio in the parlor. On a dark Tuesday in late October 1929, the announcer's panicked voice spoke of Wall Street, of a great crash, of fortunes turned to dust in a single catastrophic day. Michael, who had been listening with a detached interest, went pale. Though he had left the daily operations of his company to his board, a significant portion of his personal fortune was still tied to the volatile stock market. He immediately went to the telephone to call his broker in New York, but after several attempts he hung up the receiver, his face grim. "The lines are down," he said, a storm that had been brewing outside now lashing against the windows. "A tree must have fallen over the main line out of town. I have no way to get a message to my broker." He began to pace the room, the calm, thoughtful man replaced by a titan facing ruin. "If I don't get a sell order through by morning, I could lose everything. Everything my father built, everything I've worked for." He was trapped, isolated by the storm, just as he had once been by his grief. Clara watched him, her heart aching. She saw the panic in his eyes, the fear of a man watching his life's work crumble. While the town saw him as a millionaire, she saw a man who felt the weight of a legacy on his shoulders. She could not advise him on stocks or finance, but she knew the town of Harmony Creek. She knew its people and its secrets. "The main telegraph line is down," she said, her voice cutting through his panicked pacing. "But there is another one." Michael stopped, looking at her. "What are you talking about?" "Old Man Hemlock," she said, "at the abandoned rail yard. He was the station master for 40 years. When they closed the yard, he refused to leave. They say he keeps his old telegraph line working, just to listen to the messages, to feel like he's still a part of the world." "Hemlock," Michael said, shaking his head. "He's a recluse, a bitter old man. He wouldn't help me. He always hated my father for closing that rail spur." "He didn't hate your father," Clara corrected him gently. "He hated the world that left him behind. Let me go talk to him, Michael. He won't listen to a Sterling, but he might listen to a Thompson. My grandfather was his best friend. It was a desperate, long shot, but it was their only one." Bundled in heavy coats against the raging storm, they made their way to the derelict rail yard on the edge of town. They found Mr. Hemlock in his small, lamplit office, a wiry, white-bearded man hunched over his silent telegraph key. He greeted them with a suspicious, hostile glare. "What do you want, Sterling?" he rasped. Michael began to explain, but the old man cut him off. "Your problems are not my own. The world forgot about me, let it burn." But then Clara stepped forward. "Mr. Hemlock," she said softly, "I am Clara Mae Thompson, Jedediah Thompson's granddaughter." The old man's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition in their depths. She spoke to him not of money or stocks, but of the town they both loved, of the shared memories of a time when the railroad was its lifeblood. She spoke of her grandfather and of the friendship they had shared. She asked him not for a favor, but for his help, as one old friend of the town to another. The old man listened, his hard expression slowly softening. He looked at Clara, at her kind, earnest face, and saw the legacy of his old friend. With a deep, grumbling sigh, he nodded towards the telegraph key. "One message," he said gruffly. "Then be gone with you." For the next 20 minutes, as the storm howled outside, Michael tapped out a frantic, coded message to his broker in New York, his fingers flying across the key. When he was finished, he offered the old man a thick roll of bills, but Mr. Hemlock waved it away. His payment had been a moment of connection, a brief return to a life of purpose. As they walked back to the mansion through the receding storm, the weight of the world seemed to have lifted from Michael's shoulders. He looked at Clara, her face illuminated by the lantern he carried, and his heart was filled with an emotion that dwarfed gratitude. She had not just saved his fortune. She had met his panic with her calm, his worldly problem with her local wisdom. She was his partner, his equal, his anchor in any storm. The message sent from the dusty, forgotten telegraph office had worked. Michael's broker received the sell order just in time, saving the vast majority of his fortune from the market's catastrophic collapse. While other titans of industry were ruined, the Sterling Empire, thanks to Clara's quick thinking, remained secure. The event solidified the change between them. The crisis had burned away the last remnants of their separate pasts, forging them into an unshakable team. The Sterling mansion no longer felt like his house where she was a guest. It was their shared home, their sanctuary. The realization culminated one evening in the parlor. They had finally finished their work of sorting through the house, and the room was now restored to its former glory, but with a new, comfortable warmth. A fire crackled in the hearth, and they sat in quiet companionship, reading. Michael put his book down. "Clara Mae," he began, his voice full of a gentle gravity. She looked up, a soft smile on her face. "Yes, Michael." "What we have," he said, gesturing around the peaceful room. "This friendship, this partnership, it is the most valuable thing I possess." He took a deep breath. "For 34 years, I have been half a person, a man living with the ghost of a memory. Since returning, since finding you again, I feel whole. You have healed a part of me I thought was long dead." He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. His eyes, once so full of a distant sorrow, were now clear and filled with a powerful, loving light. "I am a man of 53 years old," he said, his voice a low, sincere murmur. "I know I am not the bold young boy you once loved. I have scars, and my hair is more grey than not. But my heart, Clara, my heart is more yours now than it ever was then." He looked at her, his soul in his eyes. "I do not want to spend another day of the life I have left without you as my wife. Not as a memory, not as a friend, but as my partner in all things. Clara Mae Lowell, will you do me the profound honor of marrying me?" Tears of joy streamed down Clara's face. The love she had buried for so long, the future she had thought impossible, was here, kneeling before her. "Oh, Michael," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "There has never been a day, not in 34 years, that my heart has not been yours." She squeezed his hands. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He let out a breath of pure, unadulterated joy and slid a simple, elegant gold ring onto her finger. He had bought it in town that week, a quiet act of hope. He then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and regret and hope of a lifetime. It was a kiss that mended the past and sealed the future, a promise that their second chance would be a love story for the ages. News of their engagement spread through Harmony Creek like a gentle spring breeze. For the most part, the town was delighted. The story of their rekindled childhood romance was a beautiful, hopeful tale in a world that was growing darker with news of the Depression. There were, however, whispers. Some of the town's more cynical gossips questioned the timing. Had the lonely widow simply set her cap for the wealthy sterling heir now that he was back in town? Was he merely taking pity on his old childhood sweetheart? Clara and Michael were aware of the whispers, but they refused to give them power. Their response was not to hide, but to live their happiness openly. They attended the Sunday church service together, their presence a quiet, dignified statement. They walked down Main Street, hand in hand, offering warm greetings to everyone they met. Their simple, genuine happiness was a more powerful refutation of the gossip than any angry words could ever be. The town saw not a scheming widow and a pitied millionaire, but two kind, decent, mature people who had found comfort and joy in each other. Slowly, the cynical whispers faded, replaced by the warm, supportive embrace of the community. They had faced their final challenge, not with a grand confrontation, but with the quiet, unassailable truth of their love. Chapter 8. A wedding of new beginnings. Their wedding was a reflection of their love, simple, sincere, and deeply meaningful. They were married on a bright, crisp spring afternoon in the garden of the Sterling mansion. The old, neglected rose bushes, which Clara had lovingly pruned and tended to all winter, had burst into a riot of color, as if celebrating their union. The guest list was small, comprised only of those who had supported them. The pastor, who had witnessed Clara's initial heartbreak, now beamed as he officiated her moment of ultimate joy. A few of Clara's closest friends from the book club were there, alongside Michael's most loyal business associate from the city. Clara wore an elegant dress of deep lavender silk, her silver-streaked hair adorned with a single perfect white rose from the garden. Michael, in a handsome dark suit, looked at his bride with an expression of such profound love that it brought tears to the eyes of their guests. They exchanged simple vows, promising not a lifetime of passion, but one of companionship, of mutual respect, of being a safe harbor for each other for all the days of their lives. After the ceremony, they held a small luncheon in the parlor, the room now filled with light and laughter. They made a toast, not to themselves, but to the house. "To new beginnings," Michael said, his glass raised. "To finally being home," Clara added, her eyes shining as she looked at her husband. That evening, they made a decision. They would not sell the Sterling mansion. It was no longer a house of ghosts. It was their home, a place they had reclaimed from the past and filled with a new and beautiful life. Their life together was one of quiet, purposeful joy. But they both felt a desire to give back to the town that had, in the end, embraced their story. The idea, born during a quiet evening in their own magnificent library, was perfect. Harmony Creek had no public library. With their combined resources and Clara's expertise, they decided to build one. But they would not just build a building, they would create a heart for their community. They donated a wing of the Sterling mansion itself, renovating it to have its own public entrance. It was to be called the Sterling Lowell Library, a name that healed the old family feud once and for all. Michael handled the finances, and Clara designed the space, creating warm, welcoming rooms for children, quiet nooks for scholars, and comfortable chairs for anyone who simply wanted a peaceful place to sit. It was a project they built together, a symbol of their partnership. The library became the town's most beloved institution, a place of learning, community, and refuge for all. Years passed. The world changed. But the quiet, steady love between Clara and Michael Sterling remained a constant, comforting presence in Harmony Creek. They grew old together, their days filled with books, their garden, and the deep, peaceful joy of a shared life. They would often sit in the public reading room of their library, watching the townspeople, a new generation of children now discovering the magic of stories. One afternoon, an elderly Clara looked at her husband, his hair now completely white, his hand resting comfortably on hers. "It's funny," she said softly. "Our story started because our fathers were torn apart by a business deal gone wrong. "And it ends," he replied, a gentle smile on his face, "with us having built a partnership that made everything right." He looked at her, his love for her as deep and as true as it had been on the day he realized he could not live without her. "Our story did not end 34 years ago, Clara Mae," he said. "The first volume was just a prologue. The real story, the best story, was the one we wrote together." They sat in the quiet of the library they had built, a testament to their love, their hearts full, their long-delayed story having finally found its perfect, happy ending. It is never too late to begin a new chapter, and the past, no matter how painful, does not have the power to write your ending. True love is not about the fire of youth, but the steady, warming glow of a shared hearth, built on a foundation of respect, understanding, and companionship. A second chance is not about reliving what was lost, but about using the wisdom you have gained to build something more beautiful and lasting in its place.